Hello, I'm so glad you are here. Today's story is about Zane Peterson, a CEO. His controlling mother is pressuring him to marry a well-bred socialite. But Zane decided to marry someone his mother would never approve. My question to you, would you have married someone just to upset your mother knowing that it would make your life difficult? Let us know in the comments below. And hit the subscribe button, it would mean a lot to us. Zane Peterson had built an empire by the time he was 28. Peterson Enterprises dominated the world of tech-based logistics, and Zane, with his sharp mind and colder demeanor, had made sure it stayed that way. But even a CEO as powerful as Zane couldn't outmaneuver one thing: family obligations. Zane Alexander Peterson, his mother Martha, had said with her trademark, regal tone, "You will be married before your 30th birthday." It was not a suggestion. Martha Peterson was a woman used to commanding boardrooms and family dinners with the same iron will. She had tried for months to parade a line of polished, well-bred socialites and heiresses before him. Each woman more perfect and more unbearable than the last. Beside her, Ira Peterson, Zane's younger brother by 3 years, found endless amusement in the situation. Ira didn't envy Zane's fortune or position. He was content running the non-profit wing of the Peterson legacy. But he enjoyed needling his older brother about the marriage deadline every chance he got. "You need a reasonable woman, not a merger deal dressed in chiffon," Ira had told him one night over whiskey. "Find someone normal, someone who's not here to upgrade her stock portfolio." Zane took the advice to heart. If he had to marry to satisfy his mother's antiquated notions of legacy and stability, he would do it his way. Business had taught him the value of contracts. He didn't need love, he needed a short-term arrangement, clear expectations, and mutual benefits. No mess, no complications. Which is exactly why he wasn't expecting to meet anyone at the hospital. It started in the waiting room of St. George's Hospital, a place that smelled of lemon disinfectant and old coffee. Zane sat stiffly in a plastic chair, tapping his thumb against his phone screen, waiting to discuss Peterson Enterprises' sponsorship of the hospital's upcoming fundraising gala with Dr. Callan. Across from him sat a woman in a faded denim jacket, clutching a battered leather bag like it was her last anchor to the world. Her name, he would later learn, was Hallie Newman. Hallie was waiting to speak to Dr. Callan too, but for a very different reason. Her father, Samuel Newman, had been admitted the night before after collapsing at work. The hospital bills were already stacking higher than she could manage, and Hallie needed answers, or a miracle. Their eyes met when Zane's phone slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. Hallie bent down to pick it up, her jacket sleeve brushing his expensive suit. She handed it back without ceremony. "You look like you could use a coffee," she said, nodding toward the ancient vending machine humming in the corner. Zane blinked. Strangers didn't talk to him like that. At work, people bowed or barked orders depending on their role. No one offered him coffee. "I'm not sure that qualifies as coffee," he replied dryly, glancing at the vending machine like it might attack him. Hallie chuckled, a sound that was surprisingly warm. She sat back and crossed her legs, the frayed edge of her jeans peeking out. "Desperate times," she said. For reasons he couldn't explain, Zane found himself setting his phone down. "Why are you here?" he asked, curious despite himself. Hallie hesitated, her thumb rubbing the strap of her bag. "My dad," she said finally. "He's having health issues. I'm trying to figure out how bad it is." Zane nodded slowly. "I'm here about a fundraiser." He didn't add that he was being dragged into another society event to keep up the Peterson image. "Sounds glamorous," she said with a wry smile. He huffed a quiet laugh. "It's exhausting." The conversation was easy, strange, but easy. By the time Dr. Callan emerged, apologizing for the wait, Zane knew he wasn't walking away without Hallie's phone number. He needed someone who didn't want him for his money, name, or position. Someone real. Temporary. Maybe, just maybe, he had just found her. Zane couldn't stop thinking about her. After leaving St. George's that afternoon, with the numbers of his fundraiser locked down and a polite smile plastered on his face, his mind wasn't on sponsorships or dinner seating charts. It was on Hallie. On the way her voice had carried warmth even in a place as sterile as a hospital. On the way she smiled even when she was clearly worried sick about her father. 2 days had passed, and he found himself in his office staring blankly at yet another email from his mother titled, "Potential Matches for Review." Zane had made a decision. He didn't need one of Martha's pristine pedigrees. He needed Hallie Newman. He didn't know if she would agree, or if she would even listen. But Zane had never been the type to back away from a negotiation. He picked up the phone and dialed the number Hallie had scribbled on a post-it as she rushed to meet Dr. Callan. She answered on the second ring. "Hello? Hallie, it's Zane Peterson. We met at St. George's." A pause, and then a smile he could hear in her voice. "CEO of the Vending Machine Critique Committee. I remember," he chuckled. "I was wondering if you had time to meet for coffee, real coffee this time. I owe you one." Another pause, longer. "Sure, as long as you're not planning to recruit me into some kind of coffee lobbyist group." "No promises," he said, grinning. They met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where no one cared about last names or who owned what. Hallie arrived 5 minutes early, looking a little hesitant, but also curious. She wore the same worn leather bag, but tonight she had swapped her denim jacket for a cozy cardigan. Zane realized with a strange jolt that he liked seeing her like this, comfortable, real, untouched by the layers of polish and pretense he was used to. After some small talk and half a cup of coffee each, Zane leaned forward slightly, voice lowering. "I want to ask you something unusual," he said. Hallie raised an eyebrow, not scared exactly, but wary. "All right," she said slowly. Zane continued, careful with his words. "I'm under a great deal of pressure to marry." Hallie stared at him for a second, her cup frozen halfway to her mouth. "That's a bold first date topic," she joked. He smiled faintly. "This isn't a date. Not in the traditional sense. I'm looking for a short-term marriage, a contract. It would be beneficial for both of us. Clean terms, financial support for your family, medical expenses covered, perhaps more. A marriage in name only." Hallie's mouth parted slightly in shock. "You're serious," she said. "Very." She sat back, studying him. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you're not chasing me for my last name. I know you're dealing with a lot right now. And I know you have more character than most of the people my mother would like me to marry." Hallie looked down at her coffee. Her mind raced. Was this even real? Was this some kind of prank? But when she looked back up, Zane's expression was steady, respectful, and something else, a quiet desperation he was trying very hard to hide. Hallie thought about her father, about the bills stacking up, about how every door lately had slammed shut before she even knocked. And here was a door wide open. "I'd need to see the terms," she said cautiously, surprising even herself. "Of course," Zane said, his voice almost soft. "And," she added, "we keep it honest. No tricks, no pretending in public and secretly expecting more." "No tricks," Zane agreed immediately, "and no expectations, except that we treat it like a business arrangement, professional, respectful." Hallie smiled then, a small, amused smile. "Mr. Peterson, you make marriage sound as thrilling as a boardroom merger." He gave her a wry look. "That's because it will be like one." She laughed lightly, but inside something unexpected stirred. A seed of curiosity, of hope, of what if. "All right," she said, reaching out her hand. "Let's hear your offer, Mr. Peterson." Their hands met, firm, sure, sealing the first move in a deal that would change both their lives in ways neither of them could predict. The following evening, Zane and Hallie sat at a corner booth in a quiet restaurant downtown, a thick leather-bound folder between them. Zane had brought a draft contract, concise, straightforward, clinical. Every clause had been meticulously reviewed by Peterson Enterprises' legal team. To him, it was the perfect deal. But Hallie wasn't nodding or reaching for a pen. She was leaning back in the booth, arms crossed, studying him like he was a puzzle she wasn't quite sure she wanted to solve yet. "I read your contract," Hallie said finally, voice even. "And I have some conditions of my own." Zane set down his pen and folded his hands neatly on the table. "I'm listening." Hallie took a breath. "First, if we're doing this, it has to look real. I don't want to be some awkward afterthought in your life or look foolish in some gossip magazine. We need to appear like an actual married couple, which means public displays of affection when necessary. Hand-holding, kisses, maybe even a few dates where we smile like we actually like each other." Zane blinked once, surprised but impressed. "Public affection. Understood. Second, Hallie continued, we need regular date nights, at least twice a month. No canceling because of work emergencies or unexpected meetings. If you want people to believe this is real, we have to act like it's real. Zane nodded, slower this time, agreed. Third, she said, her tone tightening slightly, you come home at a reasonable time at night. No disappearing into your office until midnight. If we're going to learn how to even pretend to be a couple, we actually have to spend time with each other in the same house. Zane leaned back, considering her. It wasn't an unreasonable demand, just unfamiliar. His life had been built around late nights and endless meetings. I can make that work, he said finally. Hallie tapped her fingers against the table. Fourth, no lying. About anything. If you're upset, say it. If something feels off, tell me. I'm not going to play a guessing game or fake smiles for tabloids while we're miserable behind closed doors. Zane's mouth twisted slightly. No lying. That one hit a little harder than the others. I can do that, he said after a beat. And lastly, Hallie said, her voice dipping into something more serious, more vulnerable. My father's medical care. I want his treatments, his therapies, everything. Fully covered. Not just for the duration of our marriage, for life. No matter what happens to us. Zane's expression didn't change, but inside something shifted. This wasn't just business for her. This wasn't about money or lifestyle. It was about someone she loved, about making sure he was safe. Zane gave a small nod, sharp and certain. It's already being arranged. Hallie studied him, searching his face for any sign of deceit or hidden motives. She found none, just the calm, steady gaze of a man who meant every word he said. Slowly, she picked up the pen and flicked it between her fingers. And what about the end? She asked, voice quiet. When this contract expires, what happens then? Zane's jaw tightened slightly. We dissolve the marriage. Clean break. No obligations. Hallie's heart twisted unexpectedly, but she forced a smile. Just business, right? Zane hesitated. For a flicker of a second, something unreadable passed through his eyes. Just business, he agreed. She signed her name at the bottom of the page, her hand steady even though her stomach flipped with nerves. Zane took the folder back carefully, like it was a sacred thing, and closed it. Welcome to the team, Mrs. Peterson, he said, a ghost of a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Hallie laughed softly, shaking her head. You're going to regret this, Mr. Peterson. But neither of them pulled away. And somewhere deep inside, beyond contracts and conditions, both of them felt the first tiny crack in their carefully built walls. 3 weeks later, the Peterson Enterprise annual fundraising gala was in full swing. Glittering chandeliers, a symphony orchestra in the corner, and a sea of polished smiles and designer suits. Zane adjusted the cuff of his tuxedo and glanced sideways at Hallie, standing beside him. She was breathtaking. Hallie wore a sleek navy blue gown that fit her like it had been stitched by magic, her hair pinned up loosely with curls framing her face. She looked nothing like the woman he'd met at the hospital in a denim jacket. Yet, despite the new glamour, she still radiated that same unaffected honesty. A spark that made her different from everyone else in the room. Zane offered his arm, and Hallie looped hers through his, leaning slightly toward him like a woman completely comfortable by her husband's side. Remember, she whispered under her breath. A teasing glint in her eye. Public affection, you agreed. Zane smirked and leaned down, pressing a kiss against her temple. A move so natural it startled them both. Hallie stiffened for just a fraction of a second before she relaxed into him, and they moved forward together like a real couple. Every eye in the ballroom seemed to follow them. Across the room, Martha Peterson stood tall in a black satin gown, her sharp eyes narrowing. Ira stood next to her, a champagne flute dangling carelessly between his fingers, grinning like a man watching his favorite soap opera unfold live. Well, Martha said coolly, he certainly knows how to make an entrance. And he certainly knows how to pick the one woman you didn't handpick for him, Ira added with a low chuckle. I like her already. Martha's lips tightened. She's not from our world, Ira. She doesn't understand the expectations. Maybe that's why he chose her, Ira said. Then, with a wicked grin, he added, you always said he needed someone to challenge him. Martha said nothing, but her gaze was hard as glass as she watched her oldest son glide through the crowd with a woman who smiled like she wasn't faking it. Hallie held her own with surprising grace. She laughed warmly at polite jokes. She smiled patiently through endless introductions. She even managed a conversation with a notoriously snobbish senator's wife without rolling her eyes once. But the real test came when Zane's mother finally approached. Martha Peterson descended like a queen about to judge a commoner. She smiled, but the edges of it were so sharp it could cut glass. "Hallie," Martha said, her voice silky. "I've heard so much about you." Hallie smiled sweetly. "Hopefully not everything." Ira choked on his champagne. Martha's smile tightened another notch. "I trust you'll find this evening enlightening. Our family has a certain reputation to uphold." Hallie's hand tightened just slightly on Zane's arm, enough that he noticed. Before Hallie could reply, Zane spoke, his voice low and deliberate. "Mother," he said, looking Martha dead in the eye, "Hallie is my wife, and she has my full support, no explanations needed." For a split second, Martha's composure cracked. She gave a tight nod and glided away to greet a senator. Hallie turned her face slightly toward Zane, her smile brilliant and mischievous. "You're lucky you're good-looking," she murmured. Zane chuckled under his breath. "You're lucky I don't mind a challenge." Their eyes met, a long, charged moment, and for the first time that night, the pretending didn't feel like pretending. It felt dangerously real. Later that night, in the back of the car, Hallie kicked off her heels with a groan and leaned her head against the seat. "I survived," she said, closing her eyes. "You did better than survive," Zane said quietly. "You were incredible." She peeked one eye open, grinning. "Careful, Mr. Peterson. Compliments could lead to dangerous territory." He smiled faintly, but it faded when he turned to face her fully. "Hallie," he said, voice rougher than he intended, "tonight wasn't just a show for me. Thank you." Hallie's heart squeezed painfully. She knew she shouldn't get attached. That wasn't part of the deal. But as she looked at Zane, serious, vulnerable in a way she hadn't seen before, she realized she already was. She was in trouble. Big, impossible, beautiful trouble. And the clock on their contract hadn't even started ticking yet. 2 weeks later, the Peterson townhouse was unusually quiet, as Hallie stood in the foyer, adjusting the strap on her dress and glancing at the clock. 7:02 p.m. Zane was late, but only by 2 minutes, and considering she had spent most of her life dealing with people who thought her time didn't matter, 2 minutes felt almost respectful. She heard the click of the front door and turned just in time to see Zane step inside, his tie loose around his neck, carrying a small bouquet of soft wildflowers in one hand. Hallie blinked, stunned. Wildflowers, not roses, not overpriced designer arrangements. Simple, real, imperfect wildflowers. "For you," Zane said, clearing his throat awkwardly as he held them out. "For date night, per our agreement." Hallie smiled, and for once it wasn't a teasing, guarded thing. It was soft. Genuine. She took the flowers carefully, like they might break between her fingers. "Thank you," she said, her voice a little husky. He offered his arm, just like he had the night of the gala. "Shall we?" They went to a little Italian place tucked away from the glittering city scene. Zane's choice, not his assistant's. A family-owned restaurant with handwritten menus, candlelit tables, and waiters who knew every customer's name. Hallie was floored. She expected some fancy rooftop, some cold, curated space meant for show. But this felt real. It felt like he wanted tonight to be real. Over pasta and wine, they talked, not about contracts or appearances, but about things that surprised them both. Zane told her about growing up under Martha's impossible expectations, about sneaking out with Ira to play basketball when he was supposed to be studying international business cases. Hallie shared stories of growing up in a cramped apartment above her dad's auto shop, sneaking bowls of cereal at midnight while her father worked late under the hood of old Buicks. They laughed easily, the kind of laughter that settled in your bones and made you feel like maybe you belonged somewhere after all. When dessert came, a shared slice of tiramisu, Hallie picked up her fork and said with a wicked grin, "You realize you have to feed me a bite for Instagram appearances, right? Public affection and all that." Zane arched an eyebrow but didn't hesitate. He scooped up a bite and held it out, waiting. Hallie leaned forward, laughing, and took the bite slowly, feeling the brush of his knuckles against her lips. The moment stretched too long. The air changed. Zane's gaze dipped briefly to her mouth before he forced himself to lean back, signaling the waiter for the check like a man fighting for oxygen. Outside, the night was cool and crisp. Zane insisted on walking her the half-block to the car instead of sending for the valet. When they reached the curb, Hallie turned to him, the city lights painting gold highlights in her hair. Tonight was. She trailed off, searching for a word that wasn't perfect, but wasn't pretend either. More real than I expected, Zane said quietly, saving her the trouble. Their eyes locked, and without thinking, without calculating, Zane reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers brushed her cheek, lingered for a second too long. Neither of them moved away. Neither of them said anything. Something between them shifted, tilted, as if the rules they had so carefully written into their contract had started to blur at the edges. Before either of them could say something they couldn't take back, the car pulled up. Zane stepped back first, clearing his throat. "Get home safe," he said, his voice low. "I will," Hallie whispered. She slid into the car, her heart hammering against her ribs, and didn't look back. But Zane stood there on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching the taillights disappear into the night. And for the first time in years, he didn't feel like the master of his own plans. He felt like he was free-falling. The next afternoon, at the Peterson Foundation offices, Ira leaned against Zane's desk, arms crossed, a cocky grin on his face. "You're doomed," Ira said cheerfully. Zane didn't look up from the contract he was reviewing. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," Ira said, laughing. "I saw your face at dinner the other night. You're already halfway in love with her." Zane finally glanced up, irritation flashing in his eyes, but it wasn't convincing. "Contracts, Ira. Agreements. This is all business." "Yeah," Ira said, pushing off the desk and strolling toward the door. "Tell that to the way you looked at her when she left." Zane said nothing, because for the first time since this whole arrangement had started, he wasn't sure if he could tell the difference anymore between business and something dangerously more. A few days later, Hallie sat at the kitchen table at the townhouse, staring blankly at her untouched cup of coffee. The clock ticked in the quiet, each second heavier than the last. It wasn't supposed to feel like this. She was supposed to be clear-headed, practical, focused. This was a contract, a business arrangement. But every time Zane smiled at her, genuinely smiled, or touched her hand casually as they moved through a crowd, she felt the ground under her feet tilt. She liked being with him, too much, and that scared her. Because she knew the rules. She had written half of them herself. No getting attached, no dreaming about things that could never be real. If she let herself forget that, even for a second, she'd be the only one hurt when the clock ran out. She shoved the chair back and grabbed her jacket. She needed air, space. Maybe she needed to end this before it got harder. Hallie headed to the hospital to see her father. The hospital smelled like bleach and too bright hope. Hallie walked quickly down the hall toward her father's room, rehearsing in her head how she was going to tell Zane she couldn't do this anymore. She'd pay him back somehow. Break the contract cleanly, before it was too late. But when she turned the corner, she stopped dead in her tracks. Through the glass panel of her father's room, she saw Zane. Not Zane in a suit. Not CEO Zane. Not society darling Zane. Just Zane. Sitting in an uncomfortable hospital chair, one leg crossed over the other, reading aloud from an old mystery novel to her sleeping father. His voice was soft, steady. A little awkward, but trying. On the bedside table there was a bag from Hallie's favorite deli, the one she always brought food from for her dad. Her heart squeezed painfully. He didn't know she was there. He hadn't done it for points, for show, for anyone's approval. He had done it because he cared. And suddenly, every reason she had been clinging to for backing out crumbled like sand between her fingers. She pressed her hand against her chest, trying to slow her wild heartbeat. How did this happen? She thought desperately. How did I start falling for a man who promised me nothing but a contract? And worse, how was she going to survive when the arrangement ended and she had to walk away? That night, Hallie didn't bring up her doubts. Instead, she found herself curled up with Zane on the massive leather sofa in the den, a blanket thrown over their legs, a mindless movie playing quietly on the TV. At some point, Hallie shifted, resting her head lightly against Zane's shoulder. He didn't stiffen. He didn't pull away. Instead, he moved his hand, slow and careful, and laced his fingers through hers under the blanket. They sat there like that, breathing together, existing together. Until the credits rolled and the house was filled with nothing but the sound of rain against the windows. When Hallie finally glanced up at him, ready to say something, anything, Zane spoke first, his voice a low rumble against the quiet. "You can trust this, Hallie," he said, and for once, she believed him. Even if she knew it would break her heart later, she believed him right now. And sometimes, right now was all a person had. Across the city, Martha Peterson sipped her tea in the Grand Peterson estate and narrowed her eyes at the new reports arriving from her network of society informants. Zane and Hallie were showing up everywhere together, smiling, touching, laughing, too natural, too real. Martha set down her cup with a sharp click. It was time to intervene. Before Zane forgot why he started this whole thing in the first place, before feelings turned a carefully constructed arrangement into a disaster. A few days later, the first warning sign came wrapped in silk and sprayed with expensive perfume. Hallie noticed her the second she walked into the charity auction. Tall, blonde, a human headline with legs that didn't quit. She wore a gown that probably cost more than Hallie's entire rent from 2 years, and when she spotted Zane across the room, her smile lit up like a predator spotting prey. Hallie's stomach dropped. Zane stiffened the moment he saw her too. His hand tightening around Hallie's just slightly, a silent warning. "Vivian," he muttered under his breath. Vivian Hastings. The Vivian Hastings, daughter of a Fortune 500 dynasty, former flame and Martha Peterson's dream daughter-in-law. Hallie didn't have to guess how she ended up here tonight. Martha, of course. Vivian floated over, her laugh too bright, her hand reaching out to Zane's arm like they were old friends. "Zane, it's been too long," she purred, barely sparing a glance at Hallie. "And who is this?" Hallie didn't flinch. She offered her hand smoothly. "Hallie Peterson, his wife." Vivian's smile froze at the corners, but she recovered quickly. "Oh right, I heard about the wedding." The wedding she wasn't invited to, Hallie thought with a mental smirk. "We should all have dinner sometime," Vivian said sweetly. "Catch up, I missed you." Zane's jaw ticked. "I think we're booked indefinitely. All my time belongs to my wife." Vivian's lashes fluttered. "I'm sure you'll make time for old friends." Zane looked Vivian in the eye. "Go back and tell my mother I am very happy with my wife, Hallie." She scoffed, then drifted away, leaving a trail of icy perfume and tension behind her. Hallie tried to pull her hand from Zane's, but he tightened his grip, pulling her a step closer. "I'm sorry," he muttered. "That wasn't supposed to happen." Hallie shrugged, her voice too bright. "No big deal. You have a history, it's fine." But it wasn't fine. It burned. She hated that it burned. And Zane saw it. Saw the flash of hurt in her eyes before she could hide it. He didn't say anything else, not yet. But the look he gave her was so raw, so undeniably real, it knocked the breath out of her chest. The next evening, Hallie got home to find the townhouse transformed. Candles flickered along the banister. Soft music floated down the stairs. And in the dining room, set with real china, real flowers, and real care, stood Zane looking slightly awkward but determined. "You did this?" Hallie whispered, stunned. He shrugged, looking adorably uncomfortable. "You said you liked quiet nights. Not galas, not cameras. I thought, maybe tonight should be just for us." He pulled out her chair like a nervous teenager on his first real date. No staff, no scripts, no contracts, just Zane and Hallie. Over homemade takeout, because Zane had, in his words, zero culinary skills but excellent ordering instincts. They laughed like old friends. At one point, Zane leaned across the table, brushed a crumb from her cheek with his thumb, and didn't pull away right away. His touch lingered, warm and intimate. Hallie's heart hammered against her ribs. "You don't have to prove anything to me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know what this is." Zane's hand dropped slowly, but his eyes stayed locked on hers, serious, burning. "Maybe you don't," he said quietly. And just like that, the walls between them thinned to paper. No one said it out loud. No one admitted anything. But the air crackled with everything they weren't ready to say yet. Everything they were feeling but too scared to name. Across town, Martha sat in her private lounge, a glass of wine in one hand, a furious expression on her face as the news reports rolled in. Zane Peterson and new wife steal the spotlight at charity auction. A love story for the ages. She set the glass down sharply, the crystal clinking against the marble tabletop. If Vivian hadn't worked, she would have to try something else. Something bigger. Because Hallie Newman wasn't just a temporary distraction anymore. She was becoming a permanent threat. And Martha Peterson had never lost a battle. Not to anyone. Not even to love. 2 weeks later, Hallie woke up to the buzzing of her phone vibrating violently on the nightstand. She blinked against the early morning light, fumbling for it. She had barely unlocked the screen when she saw it. Dozens of texts, missed calls, headlines. Her stomach dropped as she clicked the first message from her friend Marcy. "Hallie, call me. You're all over the news. Are you okay?" Hands trembling, she opened the link attached to the next message. There, in bold letters across a glossy website, Peterson's CEO's wife hiding a troubled past. Hallie Newman's family secrets revealed. Beneath the headline were invasive photos, pictures of her father being wheeled into hospitals over the years, references to old unpaid medical debts, insinuations that she had trapped Zane into marriage for money. They even found a sealed juvenile record, something from when Hallie was 17, taking the fall for a friend caught shoplifting. It was brutal, twisted, and it was all laid out for the world to see. Hallie sat frozen, staring at the screen as humiliation crashed over her like a wave. Martha, it had to be Martha. No one else had the reach or the cruelty to dig that deep and spin it this dirty. The bedroom door creaked open. Zane stood there, barefoot, hair mussed from sleep, his eyes sharpening instantly when he saw her face. "What's wrong?" he asked, voice already tight. She handed him the phone with shaking hands. Zane's expression darkened as he scrolled through the article. A muscle ticked in his jaw. His entire body seemed to go still, vibrating with a lethal kind of fury. "I'll handle this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Zane," Hallie whispered, blinking back tears, "it's not worth it. This is what your world is. This is what I'm dragging you into embarrassments." He set the phone down carefully and crossed the room in 2 strides. "No," he said fiercely, "you're not dragging me into anything." He cupped her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I chose you," he said. "I choose you. Every day, against anyone, against anything." Tears slipped down Hallie's cheeks. She tried to pull away, but Zane wouldn't let her. "You listen to me, Hallie Newman Peterson," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "You are not my shame. You are not a mistake. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me." Hallie let out a shaky laugh sob. "You're going to regret this when the board calls you and your mother threatens to disown you." Zane's lips curved into a fierce, dangerous smile. "Let them try." And for the first time, Hallie really realized, that Zane wasn't just playing anymore. He wasn't protecting the arrangement, he was protecting her. And maybe, just maybe, he wasn't falling. Maybe he already had. Later that afternoon, the Peterson Enterprise press conference was packed wall to wall with reporters. Zane stepped up to the podium, flanked by his board members, wearing his most ruthless suit and that icy, lethal expression the business world had learned to fear. "The recent articles concerning my wife, Hallie Peterson, are false, defamatory, and will be addressed accordingly through legal action," Zane said calmly. "Deadly. Hallie has my complete support, both personally and professionally. Any attempts to smear her character will be met with immediate consequences." He didn't stutter. He didn't flinch. He said it like it was fact, like it was law. Hallie watched from the side of the stage, her heart in her throat, barely breathing. And when Zane finally turned, and looked at her, there was nothing cold or calculated in his gaze. There was only her, only them, only everything. Across the city, Martha Peterson sat back in her leather armchair, the news broadcast flashing across her television. She swirled her wine, tight-lipped. "Foolish boy," she muttered to herself. But deep down, in that part of her that even she didn't like to admit existed, Martha felt the tiniest pang of fear. Because she had seen it. The way Zane looked at Hallie. And it was not the look of a man bound by contracts. It was the look of a man who would burn down the entire world for the woman he loved. And Martha knew one thing for certain. There was no contract in the world strong enough to undo love. A day later, Hallie tightened the belt of her light coat as she followed Zane down a quiet side street. The city was bustling a few blocks away, but here it was calm, tucked away like a forgotten piece of a different lifetime. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice light but cautious. Zane just smiled that secret, maddening smile and kept walking, his hand lightly wrapped around hers. He didn't answer. Hallie wasn't used to surprises. Surprises in her life usually meant trouble, but with Zane, maybe not. He stopped in front of a small, weathered building, an old auto garage, its windows boarded up, the sign above it faded but still legible, Newman Auto Repair. Hallie froze, her heart twisted painfully in her chest. "This was my dad's shop," she whispered, "before everything, before the hospital bills, before we lost it." Zane turned to her, his expression unreadable at first. Then slowly, deliberately, he handed her a small, folded piece of paper. She opened it with trembling fingers. It was a deed. Signed, sealed, transferred. Her father's garage, the building, the land belonged to her now. Hallie gasped, her knees wobbling slightly. You bought it?" she breathed, looking up at him, tears welling up faster than she could blink them away. Zane's voice was low and steady, almost rough. "I didn't buy it for me," he said. "I bought it for you, for your dad, for your family. No strings attached, no contracts." Hallie shook her head, overwhelmed. "Why?" He stepped closer, gently brushing his knuckles down her cheek. "Because you deserve to have your past back," he said. "Because it's part of you, and I'm all in, Hallie. Past, present, future, all of it." Tears slid down her face, silent and unstoppable. "I don't need a contract to stay," he whispered. "I need you." Hallie let out a choked laugh sob and threw her arms around him, burying her face against his chest. Zane wrapped his arms around her without hesitation, holding her tightly, like he had no intention of ever letting go. They stood there on the cracked sidewalk, the city moving quietly around them, as Hallie realized something terrifying and wonderful all at once. She wasn't pretending anymore. This wasn't an arrangement. This wasn't a transaction. This wasn't a deal. This was real, wild, terrifying, beautiful, real. "I love you," she whispered against his chest before she could stop herself. Zane stiffened for half a second, just enough for her heart to falter, and then he tilted her chin up, cradling her face between his hands. His gaze burned into hers, fierce and undeniable. "I love you too," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "God help me, Hallie, I love you." And then he kissed her. Not the careful, public affection kind of kiss they had practiced. Not a rehearsed, strategic brush of lips for the cameras. This was raw, desperate, breathtaking. The kind of kiss that didn't care who saw or what deals had been made or what promises had once been carefully scripted on paper. The kind of kiss that meant everything. When they finally broke apart, breathless, Hallie laughed through her tears. "This wasn't part of the contract," she teased softly. Zane grinned against her forehead. "Screw the contract." He kissed her again and the world spun away, leaving only the two of them standing there, on the cracked concrete of a place built by dreams, surrounded by the beginning of something that neither of them had planned, but neither of them would ever be willing to lose. 1 month later, spring settled over the city like a gentle promise, softening the hard edges of buildings and brightening the streets with bursts of green and gold. Hallie had fallen into a rhythm with Zane that felt so natural, so inevitable. It was hard to believe they had once drawn up contracts and drafted conditions just to survive each other. Now, he was simply home. One Thursday morning, Zane kissed her forehead before rushing off to meetings, leaving Hallie with a lingering feeling that he was up to something. He'd been acting strange all week, secretive, smiling to himself, dodging questions with that boyish charm she was starting to recognize as a dead giveaway that he was planning something. But Hallie, busy overseeing the slow renovation of her father's garage, let it slide. Until Saturday afternoon, when Ira showed up at the townhouse with a wide grin and a cryptic command. "Put on something nice. Nothing fancy. Just something you'd wear to a perfect day." Hallie narrowed her eyes. "If this is a Peterson family intervention, I'm not going." Ira laughed. "It's not. It's better. Trust me." Hallie, suspicious but curious, slipped into a simple, flowing sundress and sandals. No makeup, her hair falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She had no idea what was waiting for her. They drove out of the city, past fields blooming with wildflowers, until Ira turned down a winding road that led to an old oak tree standing alone in a wide open meadow. Underneath the sprawling branches, there was a small gathering, maybe 20 people at most. Fairy lights were strung from the tree limbs, dancing in the breeze. A simple wooden archway was decorated with wildflowers, the same kind Zane had given her on their first date night. And standing under that arch, in a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, no tie, no pretense, was Zane, waiting for her. Hallie stepped out of the car, her breath catching painfully in her chest. Tears blurred her vision as she realized what this was. He wasn't just surprising her, he was rewriting their beginning. No contracts, no deals, no audience of shareholders or social climbers. Just them. Zane grinned when he saw her, running a hand through his hair nervously. "You look beautiful," he said when she reached him, his voice rough. "You're insane," she whispered, laughing and crying at the same time. "I know," he said softly, "but I'm insane about you." He took her hands, lacing their fingers together. His thumbs brushed over her knuckles, steadying her, grounding her. "I wanted to give you the wedding you deserve," Zane said. "Not the one we faked, not the one we had to arrange. The real one, if you'll still have me." Tears spilled down Hallie's cheeks, and she laughed shakily. "I'd marry you 100 times over," she said. "Without a contract, without a plan, just because I love you." Zane pulled her close, pressing his forehead to hers. The officiant cleared his throat gently, and the small crowd, a mixture of friends, a few close colleagues, and even Ira wiping his eyes discreetly, chuckled softly. And then, under the wide arms of the old oak tree, surrounded by nothing but blue sky and the people who mattered most, Zane and Hallie said real vows. No scripts, no legal jargon, just promises whispered against the soft breath of spring. Zane promised to love her through storms and sunlight. Hallie promised to stand by him through every impossible moment life could throw their way. When it came time for the kiss, Zane didn't hesitate. He lifted Hallie into his arms and spun her once, her laughter filling the meadow like a song, before kissing her so deeply, so completely, it left both of them breathless and clinging to each other. Cheers and clapping rose around them, but Hallie barely heard it. All she knew was that somehow, against all odds, this man, this marriage, this life was hers, real forever, not because a contract said so, but because their hearts had written it into existence. Together. Later that evening, the sunset cast a golden glow over the meadow, and the small wedding party slowly drifted toward the tables set up under the twinkling fairy lights. Zane and Hallie were lost in their own world, smiling, laughing, clinking glasses, when a shadow crossed the edges of the celebration. Martha Peterson. She had not been invited. And from the stormy look in her eyes, she had no intention of offering congratulations. Hallie stiffened instinctively when she saw her, but Zane's hand found the small of her back immediately, steady and reassuring. "I need a moment," Martha said coldly, directing her words only to Zane. Hallie started to step back, but Zane kept his hand firmly at her waist. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of my wife," he said coolly. Martha's nostrils flared. For a long moment, silence hung between them, heavy and sharp. "You're making a mistake," Martha said tightly, her voice cutting. "She doesn't belong in our world, Zane. She never will. And if you insist on tying yourself to her, don't think it won't come at a cost." Hallie flinched, but Zane didn't waver. He straightened to his full imposing height, his jaw clenched hard. "I am warning you, Mother," Zane said, his voice low and lethal. "If you so much as try to hurt Hallie again, if you attack her, threaten her, sabotage her in any way, I will cut you off." Martha's mouth parted slightly in shock. "You wouldn't," she whispered, horrified. "I would," Zane said coldly. "You will lose your seat on the board, your access to the foundation, your connection to me, and you will never meet your grandchildren." Martha's face paled. For the first time in his life, Zane saw real fear flicker across his mother's face, not fear for her reputation, but fear of losing her son forever. "I don't need another enemy in my life," Zane continued, his voice like iron. "But if you force me to choose between you and Hallie," he let the threat hang there, clear, absolute. Martha swallowed hard, her hands tightening into fists at her sides. Finally, with a brittle breath, she said stiffly, "I will be civil." Hallie stared at her, unsure whether to believe it. "But understand something," Martha added sharply, her gaze cutting straight to Hallie. "You may have won, Zane, you may even win the rest of the world with your smiles and sweet little speeches. But you will never fit." Hallie stood tall, refusing to shrink away. I'm not trying to fit, she said calmly. I'm building a new world with him, one you don't control. Martha's mouth pressed into a thin, furious line. Without another word, she turned on her heel and walked away, disappearing into the growing twilight like a vanquished ghost. Hallie let out a shaky breath she didn't realize she was holding. Zane turned to her immediately, cupping her face gently between his hands. You, he said fiercely, are my whole world now. Don't you ever doubt that. Hallie smiled through the sting of unshed tears. I'm not going anywhere, she whispered. Good, Zane murmured, pulling her into his arms, because neither am I. They stood there, wrapped in each other, as the stars blinked awake overhead. A new family forged not by bloodlines or expectations, but by choice. By love. By something stronger than any threat, any headline, or any past. They were unbreakable now. Together. 1 year later. The midday sun spilled across the shiny, newly restored windows of Newman Auto Repair, casting warm golden light over the grand reopening banner stretched above the doors. Hallie stood proudly at the entrance, a little smudge of paint still on her hand from the finishing touches she insisted on doing herself. The place was alive again, not just bricks and oil and tools, but laughter, music, family. A small team of mechanics she and her father personally handpicked bustled inside, preparing for the soft opening next week. And right beside her, his arm slung casually around her shoulders, was Zane. Not the polished, distant CEO the world had once expected, but the real Zane. The man who showed up in jeans holding a toolbox, refusing to let her do any of this alone. The man who had chosen her, over reputation, over expectations, over everything. You did it, Zane whispered in her ear, his voice full of pride. We did it, Hallie corrected, smiling up at him. He leaned down, brushing a kiss across her temple. In the distance, Hallie saw Ira unloading a ridiculous stack of balloons, yelling at a group of neighborhood kids to quit popping them before the ribbon cutting. She laughed, her heart feeling so full it might burst. Everything they had fought for, everything they had risked, it was all worth it. Ready for the next adventure? Zane asked, his fingers tightening gently around hers. Hallie smiled, that secret, glowing smile she saved only for him. There's something you should know, she said softly, her voice trembling just a little. Zane stiffened, searching her face instantly. Hallie bit her lip, trying and failing to hold back the excitement. We're going to need a bigger toolbox, she said, pressing his hand gently against her stomach. For a moment, Zane just stared, like he hadn't fully understood. And then realization crashed into him. You're. His voice broke. Hallie nodded, tears sparkling in her eyes. We're going to have a baby, Zane. For the first time she could remember, Zane Peterson, the man who had faced down cutthroat boardrooms and billion-dollar negotiations without blinking, looked utterly, beautifully overwhelmed. He wrapped her up in his arms, lifting her off the ground and spinning her once, his laughter ringing out into the bright afternoon air. I love you, he whispered fiercely against her hair. I love you so much. Hallie clung to him, laughing and crying all at once. I love you too, she whispered back. More than contracts, more than promises, more than fear. A new legacy, built from love, not obligation. Their family, their story, their future. Together. Always. The end. Thanks for listening to Green Tea Tales. Help our channel by like, share, and subscribe.